emotional guidance system. This is great. Emotional guidance and emotional process. So this is a very practical thing we're about to discuss here. We just talked about a lot of heady concepts, stuff, and that's all high school too. But this is just we're gonna give a very literal description of the emotional guidance system and emotional processing, how you uh, use the emotional guidance system to process emotions. Um, so yeah, so the emotional guidance system, and feel free to interject at any point. Emotional guidance system refers to the metaphysical outlook that we have towards emotions, meaning that now we have the non-dual understanding of reality, and you can see emotions from the relative perspective, and we can see emotions from the absolute perspective. And so, you could say that if you describe the journey of this existence as journeying from a perspective of relativity to absolute, or from separation to unity, then every emotion, every experience in your life, including every emotion, is it holds a message or a lesson to be learned and experienced. Um, and so one aspect of it is the mental aspect, the sort of conceptual learning, and then the other aspect is the sensory learning, the felt sense learning. And so there's always going to be both wrapped in together because they're codependent arisings, as you might expect. Uh, and so, yeah, how the emotional guide system works is this. Um, every emotion tells you something about your perspective on yourself. Your emotions never tell you anything about somebody else. Um, your emotions are always a reflection of how you're viewing yourself, um, and or reality. But of course, reality as a whole and or self are the same thing. So emotions will always be reflecting how you're feeling about yourself from emotion. So, um, and then there's two ways to interpret these emotions, from the relative or from the absolute. And so, from the absolute perspective, every positive emotion is reflecting a true belief about the self. And every negative emotion is representing a false belief about self. So, for example, if you feel fear, then that is representing um, the belief that you are not safe, right? That you are just threatened. And if you're threatened and not safe from the absolute perspective, well, that's just a false belief, because the absolute truth of yourself is that what is real cannot be threatened. What is permanent about you cannot be threatened. And um, yeah, everything else doesn't actually exist. Um, from the perspective of anger, sorry, the emotion of anger from the absolute perspective, um, we have the idea that we are not, um, or sorry, anger represents the belief that we are trying to um, change or control reality um, in some sort of outcome dependent state, that our happiness is dependent on the outcome, and that reality must be better than the way it is. Um, and so it revolves around agency. So whenever something happens to you that, or it's happening around you in reality, that I don't like, you get angry because you want it to be different and you want to be able to change the reality to be different, and you can't, because you don't actually have the ability to view that as the separate zone. So, from the absolute perspective, the anger represents this false belief that that reality should be a different way, that we can control the reality to be different ways and make it so, but that is not true. Um, and then sadness, from the opposite perspective, represents the false belief in lack or lack of connection for separation. So to believe that it's separate from the outcome that you want, or the situation that you want, or whatever reality, physical form reality you want, because you believe you're not connected to it, you're separate from it, you feel like you are lacking some way. Um, and then now there's one occur. Um, so that's the absolute perspective way to interpret emotions. And then there's the relative perspective way to interpret emotions, which on the relative perspective, every emotion is actually true. So if we're only implementing the absolute perspective in our emotional understanding and processing, then we could easily lead ourselves to accidentally repress our emotions or suppress them. Non-dual zombies. Non-dual zombies. Exactly. We definitely don't want to repress or suppress our emotions because what that results in is numbness or death, essentially, the absence of sensitivity to life, which is death. Um, and so, whenever we integrate the relative perspective of emotions, what does this mean? All right, and this is something that's not talked about a whole lot. So, we have fear once again. So, fear, if I'm feeling fear, then from the relative perspective, right? Well, the fear is representing the belief that lack of safety, that we're not safe, and so, or that we are threatened or can be threatened. And then from the relative perspective, this is always true because your if your identity is a separate self, the ego, then you will never be safe. The ego will never be safe, and it is always going to be threatened and will die because it's always dying and transforming, and the transformation is the death of the old, the birth of the new. And so, from the ego's separation perspective or the relative perspective, then fear is always true because it's the belief that you're not safe, um, which the ego will never be safe. Uh, but we don't want to suppress or repress um, the unconsciousness expressing itself in these beliefs, these emotions, and I can't do anything about it. And that's why I'm angry, and it stinks. It's not right, so it should be a different way, and I'm angry about it. Uh, And so from the belief and separation that as if you could do something about it, well, then that's always that emotion is always true because you can't do anything about it. You as a separate self have no control over reality, um, and and the idea that reality should be a different way will always cause you suffering. Uh, that the idea that reality should be a different way than it actually is will always cause you suffering. So if that's what you believe, then yeah, that emotion corresponds to that, and you should be feeling that emotion um, in that circumstance. And then similarly with sadness, if you believe you're a separate self, you believe you actually are separate from that circumstance or that situation or that feeling or whatever that you want and feel disconnected from. And so from that perspective, that emotion is always true. If that is your reality, that I truly believe I'm separate from that situation, then yeah, that's the emotion that corresponds with that truth of that reality. So understanding all the emotions from the perspective of the ego, from the perspective of the divine, um, allows us to paint a clear picture so that we can see for ourselves, okay, what is the full picture of what's happening in the billing emotions. There's always this ego relative perspective based in separation, and this absolute perspectives of based in unity. Um, and so the idea is that this is the emotional guidance system, is that we can understand our emotions and understand how they correspond to certain beliefs and what perspective we're in, relative or absolute. And then once we get good at interpreting our emotions, then we can boil the situation down and work with it. And so the way we work with it is the emotional processing system. So that's the guidance system. So now that you understand what's going on, now you can process. And so the processing, it happens as a result of the understanding the guidance system, but to just walk you through like what that would literally look like for you. For example, you could say, uh, your let's say your goal is to um, have a lot of money, an aligned career, and a permaculture farm in Costa Rica, and you feel like I'm disconnected, and feel like you're disconnected from that reality. You feel like you're lacking that reality, so then you feel a sense of sadness. Um, well, first step is to not repress that sentence, to not suppress it or dismiss it or try to fix them. Um, And so this is definitely gets it could seem like it's getting a little paradoxical. Um, because well, what we're doing is we're eventually gonna shift into a positive perspective of unity. That's the truth of reality, right? But in order to shift in that perspective, we have to allow the relative aspect of our unconsciousness to express itself. Um, and so true transcendence is not going to be dismissing or fixing of a negative experience or a negative emotion. True transcendence is the recognition that it's okay the way it is. It's okay to feel the negative feeling or attractive sensation in your body. And that sensation, that contractive sensation in your body, does not need to be fixed or changed. And it can come and go as it pleases. It can come again and you're unbothered by it. That is the true transcendence. Um, to try to fix it and to remove it or to um, to force the positive perspective on yourself is going to be suppressing and repressing. So it's extremely subtle how this is applied in practice because you want to allow the negative emotion to express itself fully um, to whatever extent it would like to, and to give love to that part of yourself that feels that, and give love to that emotion that, and allow it to be the way it is. And then in doing that, the positive perspective just becomes effortlessly there because that is the positive perspective, is to give love to the negative and accrue it. Um, and the contractive sensation in your body is usually what we refer to as felt bad sensation or bad sensation that is tied to every the negative emotion. So similarly, this also applies to the positive emotions, in that you don't want to repress or suppress any positive emotions because you might think, "Oh, of course I don't need that," but you'd be surprised. We all do because uh, for whatever reasons here and there, we might think like, let's say, oh, well, I don't deserve to feel this positive emotion. I don't deserve to feel this abundance or this pleasure, or I feel bad for feeling this good because other people are suffering, or some, false belief about me feeling good means someone else has to feel bad, um, or I don't want people to see me feeling so happy because they might think it's weird, or all these other reasons that we might have for depressing our positive emotions as well. Um, so it goes both ways. Um, and so, yeah, anytime you have an emotion, positive or negative, feeling it fully is the goal. And so bliss is any feeling fully felt. And so that's why you feel all of our emotions as much as possible. That's our goal. And then we use the emotional guidance system to understand them and work with them and accept what they are. Things are the way they are, and we don't need to fix them. We're just going to feel them. And when it comes to emotions, that's really what it is. So earlier we talked about non-duality, and so with the deep understanding of non-duality, you can logically work through all the mind's paradigms about separation and fear and lack and all these um, belief systems based separation. Um, and you can have what's called the masculine aspect of healing. And then through this feeling of emotion, positive and negative, contractive and expansive, um, you have the feminine aspect of healing. So with studying the non-duality teachings, studying the philosophies, inquiry, um, you get the masculine aspect of healing. And then through feeling all sensations fully, allowing and accepting and surrendering and not fixing, um, you have the feminine aspect of healing. Um, so we need both of them. We need both of them. Like in this journey, it's one is not more important than the other. They're two halves of the same coin.
Right. You're trying to balance. You need a balance in that stuff. And but to reel it back to the emotional guidance system and how to transmute is what Connor is talking about. when you're trying to transmute energy, you're trying to fully feel it as the goal. You'll realize it pretty easily because it's bliss. So the feeling of bliss is pretty obvious once you start to understand it. But if we take it back to non-duality and duality, we can understand that everything from a dual aspect is dual. It's vibrational. It's just on some sort of spectrum, and so are the emotions, like you were touching upon. So, like how the weather is hot or cold, so is the emotions, and that's why we call it emotions. It's energy emotions, and to really understanding that there are two sides to all emotions. Like you were saying, with fear, safety being one, uh, and then attachment and depression being one of security, creative power, and then also control and anger being one of not attachment and experience. And self power. And so, really, just understanding all of these emotions, they play out in so many different ways. We have so many languages for all these things. For example, impatience is still anger. It's a subtle form of this emotion, but this is why having the mental understanding and concepts and conceptualization of these things is very useful because the emotion of the body or mind will play out the story in such a different particular way that you have to play the mental gymnastics with the ego to really understand these things. But emotion truly is what felt within the body. And so this is where non-dual zombies can really get stuck at, is that they spiritually bypass by staying in a non-dual perspective and not allowing themselves to fully feel the body, feel the emotions, staying in that masculine healed side, but the feminine healed side, which is really one of the biggest aspects that this physical reality needs right now is the feminine side, but the feminine heal side, which is really one of the biggest aspects that this physical reality needs right now is the feminine side. I mean, if you go back to all the stories from yoga with Shakti, etc., I mean, just the ill treatment of the feminine energy and all aspects of life, we can really clearly see that this is the thing that most people need to work on. This is kind of the big thing of the body. And so, really, to touch upon this even further, if we look at the sciences of yoga and qigong, we can even map where emotions are in our physical body, where it's actually stored. So, from a holistic health standpoint, from the understanding of the technology of the body, from understanding of the emotional guidance systems, not only are you healing yourself from a mental, emotional side, from an energetic side, this is also physical healing. And you can incorporate the organs or specific spots in the muscle groups or the skeletal structures. All of these things play into understanding the emotional guidance system. I'll have right here displayed a simple chakra of the emotions, but really what we can understand is that from a non-dual perspective, the only reason why we're not seeing non-duality is because of the mind of the ego. And the ego really is just this idea of separation. And so if you really look at what this idea of separation is from an emotional standpoint, it's just lack. It's just this understanding of lack. So if all negative emotions are rooted in lack. So we have lack, then we have attachment, then we have control, then we have et cetera, heartbreak, grief, unauthentic expression, confusion, disconnect. And but it's stemming from the root of black. And so really understanding that dual, non-dual perspective of the ego of separation can help you transmute all those false beliefs of the ego of separation to these positive emotions. Granted, you have to fully feel those uh, negative emotions to even have the opportunity to transmute it. If you mentally masturbate yourself into understanding these things and not fully feeling the body, it's still stored in the body. You're not having the somatic releases. You're not having any of the actual healing process done in the body. Simply put, the subconscious mind is the bottom. And so, if you actually want to clean the closet of yourself, the mind, the subconscious mind, it is working with these emotions with the body.
Yeah. And to that point, that was a great addition, and reminded me of another point I wanted to add, which is that let's say you've got a situation where it's not necessarily in your it's not coming up right now, or like it came up earlier, but you had to work or you had to focus on something else, so you kind of temporarily repressed it or pushed it out of the way to clean with something else that you want to work through it right now. So what you would do in that case, well, you've got the time, feel like this is something I want to work through if I can right now. Um, well, what you could do is you could think of that situation, the trigger, right? And you sort of give yourself a mental cue, like a line of thought or something, or imagination of a scenario. Um, referring to that situation that was your emotional trigger previously. And so you use the mental cue to bring up the emotional trigger within yourself. And then whenever that contracted situation or dealing arises, you forget the story because you use the story to cue it. But then once the sensation arrives, it's not about the story anymore because this is emotional processing. So you allow the sensation to fully express and you affirm for your desire for the emotion to be fully expressed. So you affirm that I'm ready to feel this emotion. I'm ready for whatever needs to arise and express to arise and be expressed. I'm here to feel it all and to love it all. And I have space for all of it that wants to be seen. And you allow that sensation, you focus on the sensation and put the intention to amplify it and allow it to express as much as possible. And then ideally, the sensation in your body and will amplify. And you can find out where is it located in my body? Where is this sensation, this contractive emotion located on my body? And you can feel into that, amplify it further, and then allow it to pass through. And whenever you simply allow it, amplify it, and allow it, that is doing the work. Um, so you can do this anytime you feel like you have um, something you want to work through, and at this moment couldn't be a good moment to do it. You can call it up and try to process it in that moment. Um, and so, you know, I've been using this recently where anytime I feel like I have a hint of something in like the back of my mind that I'm like, okay, well, actually, let's just take a minute for this right now because I feel this coming up. Um, I can pause what I'm doing, and now I have an opportunity to allow this to come up, fully felt, and healed. Um, and it's not always going to work, and that you can't always just think of the trigger and it all comes out. So whenever you feel that natural inclination, um, definitely take it as often as you can. Take a minute, take a break, and then allow it to come on that supposed to be healed. So that would be my recommendation for another practicable thing you can do. Um, because yeah, I've been doing that frequently. Um, and any opportunity I get, and I feel like it's been really great.
Yeah, just truly understand that the emotion is always true, but the story attached to it may not be, is a huge one to really unravel the mind from the experiences that the mind loves to create for ourselves and to really help the transmutation process of energy in our bodies and our experience. Yeah.